welcome to Bad at Goodbyes. Each week on our show, we spotlight species from the IUCN Critically Endangered Red List. These are plant and animals with decreasing populations, nearing the edges of extinction. We'll share species research, information, and conservation proposals, and then we'll spend the bulk of the show opening and holding a space for contemplation and awe. We'll perform a kind of meditative sound bath, a soundscape of gentleness, quietude, reflection, and maybe mourning. There is a very low likelihood that any of these species will survive the 21st century, and so perhaps we might acknowledge their passage with a moment of our attention, a recognition of our kinship, and with a commitment to personal and systemic change. Thank you for listening. On today's show, we consider the underground orchid. The underground orchid is a critically endangered flowering plant native to Western Australia. It is a species of extraordinary adaptation, a flower that lives mostly underground. It lacks chlorophyll, does not photosynthesize, and has no leaves or green coloration. Its main body is a horizontal underground stem called a rhizome. It stores water and nutrients, generally measuring 2 to 5 inches long. Leaf-like structures called bracts and clusters of tiny, like 1/8-inch flowers sprout from the rhizome at or just above ground level. The creamy pinkish leaf-like bracts cup and curve over the red flower clusters, looking a bit like a tulip, like half buried in the earth. So like what appears to be the flower's petals are in fact these leaf-like bracts, and what appear to be its stamen are in fact the whole flower, these tiny whole flowers themselves. Since it does not photosynthesize, the underground orchid relies on a complex of symbiotic relationships with a fungus and with the broom honey myrtle shrub. The fungus colonizes the orchid's roots, acting as a conduit for essential nutrients, and in return, the orchid provides the fungus with a suitable habitat. This same fungus also forms a relationship with the roots of the broom honey myrtle shrub, assisting the shrub in nutrient and water uptake. And then the shrub in turn provides the fungus with carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis, and the underground orchid indirectly benefits from the broom honey myrtle's photosynthetic output via the fungus. The underground orchid reproduces both sexually and via asexual vegetative propagation. Its sexual reproduction involves flowering, then pollination, likely facilitated by small underground or surface insects like ants and termites. And then once fertilized, seeds are produced in fleshy fruits, which take several months to mature. The precise mechanism of underground orchid seed dispersal remains unknown. But the fossil record suggests that perhaps small mammals like bandicoot and pootaroos may have contributed to seed dispersal through consumption of the fruit. The underground orchid also reproduces asexually through the extension of its rhizome, growing like new offshoots, which is effectively just cloning the parent plant. These cloned offsprings cannot fertilize each other or the parent, and so asexual reproduction provides some short-term survival. It's not a viable long-term population growth strategy. The underground orchid is native to Western Australia in the Corrigan area east of Perth. This is semi-arid bushland with hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. The landscape consists of plains and hills with sandy, loamy soils. Annual rainfall is less than 15 inches per year on average, with most of the rain falling during the cooler months. The underground orchid exclusively grows within thickets of broom honey myrtle. These are often interspersed with scattered eucalyptus and acacia trees, and those thickets provide shade and microclimate necessary for both the orchid and the myrtle's success. The underground orchid has developed several adaptations for its low rainfall habitat. First, obviously, it mostly grows underground, which shields it from harsh sun and from drying winds. An absence of leaves minimizes its water loss, and cyclically, the orchid's flowering and seed production coincide with periods of higher rainfall and water abundance. The orchid shares its habitat with scrub heath shrubs, malleefowl, gum trees, berry saltbush, wallaby, cockatoo, skinks, eucalyptus, possum, acacia, lichen, snakes, geckos, kangaroos, of course the broom honey myrtle shrub, and many, many more. In the dream, in the dark, the ever cool dark. In the dream, in the dark, our hands entwined. In intimacy, a giving, taking, holding, and waiting, and reaching, and growing in concert. Harmony and dissonance, a crescendo, a blossoming on a tiny dirt stage. brooding in that sharp first light. In the dream. Due to its highly specialized adaptations, the limited availability of suitable habitat poses a significant threat to the underground orchid population. Its intertwined reliance on fungi and thriving and successful thickets of broom honey myrtle challenges its spread and growth, even like in a stable habitat, but of course, human encroachment and human-induced climate change are pressuring the orchid's native ecosystem. A warming climate caused by continued release of greenhouse gases by the human population is reducing rainfall in the region. So this affects the broom honey myrtle by decreasing its biomass and its leaf litter fall. That impacts soil nutrition cycling, moisture retention, and critical fungal activity, all of which ripples downstream to the underground orchid. Local human development and agricultural practices risk chemical spray drift and are changing drainage patterns. So this is reducing water availability and compacting and eroding the soil. Rising salinity in the water table, which is also caused by local agriculture, reduces the freshwater availability for these plants. Human-introduced invasive species such as rabbits and fast-growing weeds further threaten the orchid. While the precise impact of the weeds is uncertain, they likely compete with the orchid, honey myrtle, and the fungus for soil moisture and nutrients. These invasive weeds also increase the risk of fire, which is particularly detrimental to the orchid when it is flowering. The underground orchid is protected by the Australian Department of Environment and Conservation, and they're monitoring and surveying plant numbers and the impact of threats, including early intervention into any wildfires which may threaten the species. 2 habitat sites have been set aside as nature reserves. The underground orchid was placed on the critically endangered red list in 2020, and their population is currently in decline. Our most recent counts estimate that less than 9 underground orchid remain in the wild. Research for today's show was compiled from the IUCN Plants, People, Planet, which is a scientific journal, and from Wikipedia. In a moment, I would like to perform some music in hopes of opening a space to be in contemplation of the other lives with whom we share our earth. But briefly, I want to clarify what I feel like is sort of a nuanced idea. I want to state really specifically that I don't think of the Underground Orchid as a vessel from which I extract meaning or endeavor to put meaning upon. And so instead, I want this music simply to express my very human awe and be a space to consider my own relationship to other life on our planet, in particular, as some of that life is threatened by extinction. So I will sit in this space of sound, awe, and contemplation, and I warmly invite you to join me. I honor the life force of the underground orchid. I will never know or see it, so instead I will carry its human name in my record. I am grateful to have shared time on our small bright planet with this being, and I lament the ways in which I and my species have harmed and diminished this species. And so in the name of the underground orchid, I pledge to reduce my consumption, my carbon footprint, and curb my wastefulness. I pledge to acknowledge and attempt to address the costs of my actions and inactions. And I pledge to resist the harm of any kin or their habitat by corporations and governments. I pledge my song to the witness and memory of all life, to a broad celebration of biodiversity, and to the total liberation of all beings. This has been Bad at Goodbyes. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's take care of each other and all of our kin. Bye.